Next, Arizona AZ, capital Phoenix. Fun fact, Phoenix is the most populous state capital, with more than 1.625 million people living there as of 2021.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex the Explorer, and today we're going on a fun journey across the United States. There are 50 states, each with its own name, abbreviation, capital city, and cool facts.
Next, Alaska, AK, capital Juneau. Fun fact, Juneau is the largest state capital by area, with a municipal area of 3,255 square miles, which includes part of a glacier field. Next, Arkansas, AR, capital Little Rock. Fun fact, in 1950 they segregate schools across the South.
Next, California, CA, capital Sacramento. Fun fact, beneath the streets of modern Sacramento lies the old underground city, dating back to 1839.
Next, Colorado, CO, capital Denver. Fun fact, known as the Mile High City, Denver is exactly 5,280 feet above sea level.
Next, Connecticut, CT, capital Hartford. Fun fact, while it's not the oldest state capital, Hartford is home to the country's oldest newspaper, the Hartford Courant, oldest public art museum, and Bushnell Park.
Next, Delaware, DE, capital Dover. Fun fact, the city is home to Delaware Motor Speedway, aka the Monster Mile.
Next, Florida, FL, capital Tallahassee. Fun fact, Tallahassee sits on one of the highest points in Florida, at 203 feet above sea level. Next, Georgia, GA, capital Atlanta. Fun fact, in 1996, Atlanta hosted the Summer Olympics.
Next, Hawaii, HI, capital Honolulu. Fun fact, Honolulu is home to the only royal palace in the United States, Iolani Palace.
Next, Idaho, ID, capital Boise. Fun fact, Boise State House is heated by geothermal energy from a source 3,000 feet below ground.
Next, Illinois, IL, capital Springfield. Fun fact, many people visit Springfield to see historic sites associated with 16th President Abraham Lincoln, who lived here from 1837 to 1861. Next, Indiana, IN, capital Indianapolis. Fun fact, Elvis Presley gave his last concert at Indianapolis's Market Square Arena in 1977, less than 3 months before his death.
Next, Iowa, IA, capital Des Moines. Fun fact, people have been drawn to the Des Moines area for more than 7,000 years.
Next, Kansas, KS, capital Topeka. Fun fact, in 2010, Topeka temporarily renamed itself Google for a month in an effort to earn a spot in the company's Fiber for Communities program. Next, Kentucky, KY, capital Frankfort. Fun fact, American frontiersman and folk hero Daniel Boone was originally buried in Missouri, but his remains were later moved to the Frankfort Cemetery.
Next, Louisiana, LA, capital Baton Rouge. Fun fact, the Battle of Baton Rouge, fought in 1779, was the only Revolutionary War battle to take place outside the original 13 colonies. Next, Maine, ME, capital Augusta. Fun fact, Augusta is the easternmost capital in the United States, but not the northernmost. Juneau, Alaska, and Olympia, Washington are both farther north.
Next, Maryland, MD, capital Annapolis. Fun fact, founded in 1654, Annapolis played an important part in early American history. Next, Massachusetts, MA, capital Boston. Fun fact, in 1919, the Great Molasses Flood took place in Boston.
Next, Michigan, MI, capital Lansing. Fun fact, Lansing was the childhood home of such famous residents as actor Burt Reynolds and basketball star Magic Johnson.
Next, Minnesota, MN, capital St. Paul, St. Paul. Fun fact, Charles M. Schultz was born in St. Paul.
Next, Mississippi, MS, capital Jackson. Fun fact, the first human lung transplant happened at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson in 1963. Next, Missouri, MO, capital Jefferson City. Fun fact, Jefferson City was specifically built to be Missouri's state capital.
Next, Montana, MT, capital Helena. Fun fact, the city got its start as a mining camp during the 1860s Montana Gold Rush. Next, Nebraska, NE, capital Lincoln. Fun fact, the first American Arbor Day started in Lincoln, Nebraska. Next, Nevada, NV, capital Carson City. Fun fact, from 1984 to 2014, Carson City's average temperature rose by 4.1 degrees, the largest increase in the United States.
Next, New Hampshire, NH, capital Concord. Fun fact, Krista McAuliffe, who taught science at Concord High School, won a nationwide contest to fly into space aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1966.
Next, New Jersey, NJ, capital Trenton. Fun fact, the
The famous painting Washington Crossing the Delaware memorializes the general leading his troops into a surprise attack against.
Next, New Mexico, NM, capital Santa Fe. Fun fact, Santa Fe is the highest U.S. state capital at more than 7,000 feet above sea level and the oldest, first founded in 1610.
Next, North Carolina, NC, capital Raleigh. Fun fact, Raleigh is known as the Smithsonian of the South for its incredibly large number of museums and historical attractions.
Next, North Dakota, ND, capital Bismarck. Fun fact, Bismarck was named for German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in an effort to attract German immigrant settlers in the late 1800s. Next, New York, NY, capital Albany. Fun fact, Albany is the oldest continuously occupied settlement in the original 13 colonies, with an original fort built here before 1614.
Next, Ohio, OH, capital Columbus. Fun fact, fast food giant Wendy's got its start in Columbus in 1969. Next, Oklahoma, OK, capital Oklahoma City. Fun fact, in April 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a truck loaded with explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City.
Next, Oregon, OR, capital Salem. Fun fact, the Academy Award-winning film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was filmed at the Oregon State Hospital in Salem.
Next, Pennsylvania, PA, capital Harrisburg. Fun fact, Harrisburg was a Next, Rhode Island, RI, capital Providence. Fun fact, Providence has more donut shops per person than any other city in the country. Next, South Carolina, SC, capital Columbia. Fun fact, Congaree National Park, just outside Columbia, is home to one of the world's few populations of synchronous fireflies.
Next, South Dakota, SD, capital Pierre. Fun fact, though named for a Frenchman, Pierre Chouteau Jr., this U.S. state capital is actually pronounced Pierre. Next, Tennessee, TN, capital Nashville. Fun fact, Nashville is home to the Grand Ole Opry radio show, which has been on the air since 1925.
Next, Texas, TX, capital Austin. Fun fact, the largest urban bat colony in the world lives under the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin.
Next, Vermont, VT, capital Montpelier. Fun fact, Montpelier is the smallest state capital with just a little over 8,000 residents.
Next, Virginia, VA, capital Richmond. Fun fact, during the U.S. Civil War, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. Next, Washington, WA, capital Olympia. Fun fact, in 1949, Olympia experienced a 7.1 magnitude earthquake.
Next, West Virginia, WV, capital Charleston. Fun fact, the first brick street in the world was laid in Charleston in 1870.
Next, Wisconsin, WI, capital Madison. Fun fact, Madison loves pink plastic flamingos so much they declared them the official city bird in 2015.
Next, Wyoming, WY, capital Cheyenne. Fun fact, in 1869, when the first session of the Wyoming Territorial Legislature met in Cheyenne, they passed an act giving women the right to vote.
Whew, that's all 50 states. From Alabama to Wyoming, each one is unique and special. Thanks for joining me on this adventure. See you next time.
First up, Alabama, AL, capital Montgomery. Fun fact, Montgomery is one of the most important cities along the Civil Rights Trail.